All right, hello everybody. Here I am in the old city of Yerushalayim at my good friend David Stern's house. So this is going to be a review of the laws of Shehiya and Hatmona. And I'm going to start by going over some of the laws of Hatmona that I did not properly get to at the end of last year on Monday night. So we'll start with the concept of partial Hatmona, which we said that the Mechaber holds that a partial Hatmona is already a problem. Rama says that only complete Hatmona is a problem. And the Alter Rebbe has a little bit of a compromised position between the two. He says that in reference to Hatmona in a way that maintains heat. The main problem is on the top, and Hatmona in the way that adds heat. The main Hatmona is on the walls, and a majority of the walls is what makes it a problem. Now the question is, what about a Hatmona in a way that adds heat? The most common application of that today is when you put towels on a cholent pot that's on an oven, or in any other pot that's on an oven for that matter. So even though the towels themselves do not add heat, but the Yosef brings down from the Rishonim that through the fact that the heat is being added from below, that causes the towels to be considered also adding heat, and therefore it becomes a problem. Now, it is noteworthy that even though the Mechaber says that, and that's how the Alter Rebbe paskins, however, interestingly, Rabbi Yosef paskins different than the Mechaber. And this is based on the Maharam Chaviv, who brings down from the Rishonim, I believe it's the Ramban, who says that no, if the item that you're surrounding it in is not adding heat, even though as a result of something that's beneath it, there is heat being added, nevertheless, we do not consider the top thing to be adding heat. So, and the Maharam Chaviv says this is the minhag. So the Rabbi Yosef basically says, since the minhag that preceded the Mechaber is to be lenient, therefore we can continue to follow that minhag. The Sfardim can continue to follow that minhag. However, he says that one should only be lenient if it's on a plata or on a blech, but not if it's on the fire itself. So I imagine the concept behind that is that the plata and the blech themselves are not considered a hatmona according to many opinions because they are not pliable surfaces. They cannot be bent. And therefore, the fact that they are there is not a hatmona, plus the towels are not a hatmona, whereas if it's a fire, which is more like the coal itself, then you have the hatmona just from the bottom itself, and therefore one should be strict. Nevertheless, the Yalkut Yosef says that it is better to drape the towels in such a way that they do not cling to the sides of the pot, or else make sure they do not cover all of the sides of the pot. Another noteworthy matter is that we discussed in last week's shir about the fact that some people sell these covers for Shabbos urns, which presumably keep the urn hot. Now, based on this concept that the heat being added from below will cause the towels or whatever it is surrounding it to become hot, we had a difficulty understanding this opinion. So, or this I shouldn't say an opinion, but this phenomena that people sell these kind of, things that wrap around the urn. So I did find an explanation for it, and it's in the Minchas Yitzchak, from Yitzchak Weiss, the Dayan of Yerushalayim, and he basically says that there's a few reasons to be lenient. First of all, there is the opinion that says since the item itself is not adding heat, it's okay. Plus the fact is that the water is already heated from before Shabbos, and therefore it can be considered permissible according to the Rashbam and others that hold that the halacha of Hatmona is the same as Shehiya. Whenever it's a permissible kind of Shehiya, it becomes a permissible kind of Hatmona. And another point, I think we mentioned it in the past, is that some say when you do a Shehiya in a way of Hatmona, it's not forbidden. The Hatmona is only forbidden if you cook it separately, and then you do a special act of insulating. Whereas if you do one act of cooking in a way of insulating, then it's not forbidden. So I guess the heter would be if you put the water in when it's cold, and you put that wrap around the urn when it's cold, and you heat it up together, so then it could be considered that it's not a separate act of insulating, and therefore one can be lenient. So it's a few opinions put together that this leniency is based on. Okay. Another point that I don't remember if we mentioned, but that if a person did do a forbidden hatmana and they realized on Shabbos, they must remove it, right? Because it's not only forbidden to do, but it's forbidden to have. Going back to the concept of the walls, or majority of the walls being covered, that it's a problem, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has a chiddush, which Rav Farkash brings down in his sefer. And that is as follows. Shlomo Zalman says, even though we're usually strict on a majority of the walls, that's only if the majority starts from the bottom and goes up to the top. Whereas if on the bottom it's visibly uncovered, visibly to the onlookers and so on, and then it starts, then the insulation starts, even if it's the majority of the side, Shlomo Zalman argues that should be permissible. And the reason for this is the whole idea of Hatmana being forbidden is that it's similar to insulating in coals. Now, when you insulate in coals, obviously you start from the bottom and you go up. So if it's the majority insulated from the bottom up, it's like coals. But if it's the majority insulated from the top down, it's not like coals. Now, this is a chiddush, nobody else says it, and it's hard to base a halacha on a chiddush, even though it's logical. But that is the opinion of Shlomo Zalman, and it is worth noting. Okay, in terms of wrapping a challah in foil or anything else in foil and putting it on top of a pot. So you have a pot that's on the fire, or on a blech, or on a plata or whatever, and you want to put something on top of that pot. So you want to, let's say, keep a challah hot, whether it's from before Shabbos or on Shabbos, it's dry, it's fully cooked, and so on. So in general, that is a permissible concept. However, the problem is, why do we not consider that the heat from below is going to cause the foil to be a forbidden hatmana? So basically, our Farkash brings, if the purpose of the foil is to keep the challah clean, the pot clean from the challah, or to keep it clean when it's in the freezer, or whatever other concept like that is, then it's not forbidden. If the purpose of the foil is to maintain the heat, then it would be a problem. That is something worth noting. Another thing is about the minhag that some people have. I don't know if you can call it a minhag, but the practice that some people have of wrapping a food in foil or in a special bag and putting it inside the challah. So there are different opinions in the poskim about this, and we mentioned it in the past, but I'll go over it again. So first of all, everybody agrees if there are holes in the foil or in the bag, that is permissible because the flavor is exchanged and therefore it's considered to be one complete dish. Now, if there are no holes, then Rav Wosner, as well as the Minchas Yitzchak, are strict. And they hold that because the food, whether it's a kishka or a kugel or whatever else, inside the foil is being kept separate, so therefore it's like you're doing hatmana in a way that adds heat, and therefore they are strict. Shlomo Zalman and others are lenient, and they hold that it's considered like you are cooking two things directly on the fire. And the only reason that you have that foil is to keep it clean and separate from the other dish. In other words, you don't want the kugel to just become a big mush and disappear in the challah. And the same thing with the kishka. You want it to be one separate entity. But it's not that you want the Hatmona of it. You would have wanted to put it directly on the fire, but there's no room for it, or it's just not practical, whatever it is. So you're doing it within that pot. But it's as if you're putting it on the fire. So that is their argument. I believe they have a few other arguments. I mean, usually in foil, the flavor is going to go through and so on. So it's in that sense, it's also considered one. Now, certainly, Ibn Yitzchak says this, that even he would agree it's permissible if you put it raw before Shabbos in the challenge in that way, because then you're actually cooking it there. And then you have the concept of saying that Shehiya, when Hatmona is done in a way of Shehiya, even though it continues in a Hatmona way, it's permissible. So that is worth noting. Now, we also discussed a crock pot. So let's go into that a little bit more. Based on everything we've been learning, it would seem that a crock pot would be fine. Because I'm talking about as far as the aspect of adding heat. We know you cannot insulate in a way that adds heat even from before Shabbos. So Rav Shlomo Zalman holds that a crock pot is considered an insulation that adds heat, and he forbids it. Now, the obvious problem with this is that we've been learning that if you do Hatmona in a way that adds heat, but that the item you're doing the Hatmona with is not hugging the walls of the pot, that is not a forbidden Hatmona. And this seems to be the case with the crock pot, where it's simply sitting, the pot of the crock is sitting on the metal of it, and it's only hugging that metal along the very top of it. Whereas once it goes down into the metal, it obviously narrows and it does not touch those walls. So based on what we learned, it's the Torah quoting the Rush, and he says that the leaving something in an oven is not Hatmona because the oven walls do not hug the pot, and therefore it's not similar to coals that hug the side of the pot. And the whole problem with Hatmona in a way that adds heat is because it's similar to the coals. Well, this is not similar to the coals, and therefore it's okay. So why is Rav Shlomo Zalman strict? Rav Shlomo Zalman is usually not strict based on, svaras that are not, logically sound. Rav Shlomo Zalman is always very logical and thorough and so on and so forth, very based on poskim and the sources. So where is this? Where is the concept from? So basically, what it seems is that the argument can be made that when a Hatmona is being done within another keli, and you intend to have that keli be as close as possible to the inner keli, that it's a problem. In other words, the Rishonim bring that if you put a pot on top of another pot and it's not touching it, then it's okay. But it seems that if the purpose of it of the top pot is, if the top pot does touch it, then it is a problem. Also, it's brought down if the top pot is there just to protect and cover it and keep things from falling into it, then it's okay. But otherwise, it's not okay. Now, whenever there's a pot in a pot or on top of a pot, it's impossible for it to hug the sides. It's just not going to go in, especially because you have the handles and so on. So the way those Rishonim can be explained is that even though usually, in order for it to be a problem about Hatmona, you have to hug the walls of the pot that's inside the surrounding insulation. But if you do your best to make it hug, but you physically aren't able to make it hug anymore, that can be argued that it is considered Hatmona. So if you have a pot that's as close as possible to being actually touching, but it can't physically touch because otherwise it's not going to fit, that could be considered Hatmona since you're doing your very best to make it hug. And some Rishonim actually seem to indicate this because they say there has to be a lot of space between the inner and the outer, between the walls that are doing the Hatmona and the pot inside of it in order to make the Hatmona permissible. So the fact they say there's a lot of space, what's the difference, a lot or a little? It's either touching it or not. So it could be understood. Farkash understands it this way, that if it's a lot of space, that means you didn't really work hard to bring the Hatmona as close as possible. But if it's a little space, that means you did your best and you can't actually squeeze a pot onto a pot, then it's a problem. So that would seem to be a basis for this. An additional svara, additional logic could be that when do we say that it has to be actually hugging on all sides, on the majority of the all sides, is if it's not a situation of Hatmona that could actually lead to stoking. In other words, you have Hatmona that could actually lead to stoking, which is the coals, and then you have Hatmona that could lead to the coals, which is other things that add heat. So when it comes to the coals, maybe we would be strict even on part of the pot. But when it comes to something that's similar to the Hatmona, then we're not going to be strict unless it's a majority of the pot. So the argument can be made that Hatmona with a crock pot, because you could actually stoke the coals, i.e. elevate the temperature of the crock pot. So even though it's not a majority of the pot, it's still forbidden because it's not similar to the coals, but it's like the coals themselves. And therefore, perhaps in that case, we are strict even on a partial Hatmona. So now, based on this, it's clear that if it would be a type of crock pot that you cannot elevate the temperature, there is no switch for temperature elevation, it's just a one temperature crock pot, then it would be okay. But if it's a crock pot that has two temperatures, then it would seem to be a problem. Nevertheless, Rav Farkash brings many poskim that are lenient, and they hold like the simple halach and Shulchan Aruch that if it does not hug the majority of the walls, it is forbidden. An additional argument can be made that it is considered one keli, since it's made to be used as one keli. Therefore, it's not like a thing that you insulate in something else, but it's just one, since that's the intent of using it. And there is no concept of Hatmona if it's one keli. Another argument can be made, and we mentioned this earlier, is that when you do Shehiya in a way of Hatmona, some places say that it's not a problem. So if you put a raw cholent into the crock pot, you cook it within the crock pot, and you leave it within the crock pot, so you didn't do a separate act of Hatmona. So many Rishonim are mekel, and we can add that as an additional reason why we can be mekel with a crock pot. Now, those that do want to, an additional reason to be lenient with a crock pot is that it's usually used for Shabbos day, and we have the Svar of the Rashbam, like we mentioned earlier, that anything for the next day is not a problem. Just like we say that Shehiya, according to some opinions, for the next day is not a problem, because you don't need to stoke it, it's going to be ready anyway. And those that compare Shehiya and Hatmona would therefore say that you could do a Hatmona for the next day as well. Okay, those that do want to be strict based on Rav Shlomo Zalman, they put foil balls. They'll roll up some foil balls and put them on the bottom of the crock pot so that when they put the pot into the crock or whatever that metal thing around it is, it lifts it up a little bit. It keeps just a little bit lifted up, and the point of that is that it should not hug the walls at all, not even on the top. Okay. Now, it is noteworthy that a kli sheni is not considered to be moisef hevel, even though it's hot, but it's not moisef hevel because the heat in it is going down. Another point is that you are allowed to do Hatmona in a kli sheni. That means you can take a food that has been transferred from a kli rishon to a kli sheni, and you can then do Hatmona with it. And there's two reasons given for it. One is that they didn't make the decree unless it was a kli rishon, which is a normal way to do Hatmona. And another point is that since your whole point in transferring it is to cool it down, usually, so therefore, once you're going to cool it down, you're not going to go want to heat it back up again by bringing it to the boil, which is the very reason why Hatmona is forbidden on Shabbos, and even in a way that does not add heat. So now, based on this, we have the leniency of heating something, of putting something into a thermos on Shabbos. Even though you cannot insulate in a way that does not add heat on Shabbos, and a thermos seems to be exactly that. It doesn't add heat, but it keeps the heat. Nevertheless, the place can say it's okay. Why? Because the thermos itself is a kli sheni, and there is no concept of insulating the kli sheni. Another point is that the thermos is one keli. It's not like you're doing insulation of a keli within a keli. So those are reasons to be lenient and to allow insulation in a thermos. Now, when it comes to insulating cold food, he said it is okay if the purpose is to make sure it doesn't cool down any further, or to keep it cold, or to just keep it from getting dirty, or whatever it is. Now, the exception is if you're insulating cold food and your intent is to heat it up, and it will heat up, then it is considered a problem. So the practical application of this is that you would not be allowed to take a cold food and fully submerge it, even in a kli sheni. So there's no bishul issues because it's a kli sheni, even though we'll discuss that sometimes a kli sheni cooks, but let's say this thing is already cooked or whatever it is. There's no bishul issues. You want to take a can of something and completely submerge it in a kli sheni, and the can is cold. Nevertheless, it's forbidden because you're doing a hatmona on Shabbos. And you cannot say that it's permissible because it's cold. That's only permissible when you don't want to heat it. Here where you want to heat it, so it is considered a forbidden hatmana. However, because the kli sheni is not considered to add heat, so it has the rules of a hatmana on Shabbos in a way that does not add heat. So again, it's not halachically adding heat, but practically it's adding heat. So therefore, it makes it like hatmana of a hot item in a way that maintains the heat. And therefore, it has those halachas, which means that you could take something cold and put it in a kli sheni if it's not completely submerged. Let's say you have a baby's bottle. You want to use it in a kli sheni, okay, which according to the rules of klirush and kli sheni, you're allowed to heat liquids in a kli sheni. So you take the bottle out of the fridge, you take water from the urn, you put it in a quart or whatever, a bowl, whatever it is. Then you put the bottle in that. Now the bottle is not going to be submerged in the hot water, it's just going to be surrounded by the hot water on the sides, not on the top. And therefore, based on the principles of hatmana in a way that maintains heat, being only forbidden if it's on the top, therefore that would be permissible. All right, one more point. I think we did discuss it in the past, but I'll mention it again. And that is that if a person does want to add hatmana to something that is already insulated in a way that does not add heat, they can add. However, the Mishnah Berurah says they cannot do so if the food inside is not yet cooked. Not yet fully cooked, I should say. Alter Rebbe holds that it's permissible, even if it's not yet fully cooked. And we didn't properly understand it last time, but we explained that Rav Farkash says a logic which is difficult to understand, but nevertheless, that since the food is not cooking from an external heat, it's cooking from an internal heat, and you are simply not allowing that internal heat to escape, perhaps that is not considered a significant act of cooking. All right, so we have basically finished tying up those points about hatmana. Now we are going to go over to reviewing the laws of Shehiya and Hatmona. Let me just bring up the Shulchan Aruch. So everybody knows that Shehiya means leaving food on the fire from before Shabbos. And everybody knows there's a machlokes between Hananya and the Chachamim. And Hananya is of the opinion that you can do Shehiya even if the food is only Kemachal ben Drusoy. Ben Drusoy was a gangster who used to eat his food not fully cooked. Some say it's a third cook. The Rashi, the Rambam says it's half cooked. And according to him, once you have it at that situation, you're allowed to leave it on the fire on Shabbos, even if the fire is completely uncovered. The reason we're lenient, that Hananya is lenient, is because he says since it is already edible to some people and it's going to be ready soon even for everybody else, so therefore there is no fear that the person is going to be so nervous about it and dafka want to stoke the coals. And again, the whole reason why there's a problem with Shehiya, I don't know if I mentioned it before, the whole reason that Shehiya could be a problem is because the food is not yet ready or not yet ready enough or not yet good enough, and the person may forget that Shabbos and stoke the coals to get it ready. So that is the opinion of Hananya. Now, The Chachamim who argue on Chananya say that no, even if it's half cooked, even if it's fully cooked, as long as continued cooking makes it taste better, which is called metzamek v'yaf aloi, then it is forbidden to cook it on an open flame or on uncovered coals. And the reason for that is that they say since it's continuing to cook, so he's still concerned to make sure that it should cook better, and he may want it to cook faster, better, so he may stoke those coals. The halacha is not clear who to paskin like. However, the Mechaber seems to paskin like the Chacham who argue on Chananya, and the Yeshayim that he brings is like the Chananya, so he seems to paskin that way. In practice, Rabbi Yosef says the minhag of Sfardim as well is like Chananya, and that is how the Ramah actually paskins in terms of the minhag, that it is permissible to leave food as cooked on top of a open flame directly. Now, it is worth mentioning that some say this whole issue is only with coals, which die down. And when it comes to our fires, which do not die down, unless, of course, the gas gets cut off or the electric or there's a blackout or who knows what, so it doesn't really need to be stoked. It's an ongoing flame, not like in those days when the coals died down and if you didn't stoke them, you were in trouble. So there's an argument brought that really there should be no issue of Shehiya at all with our modern equipment. Nevertheless, the minhag is to be strict, like the opinions that say that we do not differentiate. Once they made a decree, they made a decree, and therefore applies also to our heat sources. But that opinion is something worth noting and perhaps relying on b'diavad in a situation of need. Again, I'm not paskening, I'm just mentioning that, one should discuss it with the Rav if that does come up. Okay, now, all that we've been discussing, according to Chananya Chacham, is all if the coals are not covered. If the coals are covered, which is what's called grufa and ketuma in Hebrew, grufa means that the coals are removed, ketuma means they're covered with ashes. So then, by doing an action which shows that you are minimizing the heat, and therefore you don't care so much about the heat, so therefore we are not concerned that you're going to stoke it. This is the opinion of this is clear in the Gemara, in the Mishnah. And even though Rabbi Akiva Eiger questions this, and Mishnah Berurah quotes him, but most opinions seem to say that this works even if it is less than K'ma'achal ben Rusoi. Okay, so based on this, let's discuss the modern kitchens a little bit. So we have a blech. And once you have a blech, or if you're using a plata, and the plata is considered to be a covered flame, I should actually qualify that. If the plata has two different temperatures, then perhaps it's not considered a covered flame because there's nothing that you added to it to cover it. Right? The blech is a piece of metal you put on top of the flame. The plata is not that. But if it has no temperature control, then it's certainly not worse than covering the flame because you cannot physically elevate the temperature. If it has temperature control, there are those that say it's still considered a covered flame because the flame is not actually visible. But others say, and this seems to be the opinion of the Magen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe, that because you didn't do an action to cover it, therefore it would not be considered covered. But in any case, on a plata that has no temperature control or on a blech, so it would seem that you could leave everything. If you want to be strict like a Rabbi Akiva Eiger, you would make sure to cook it halfway. But if it's more than halfway cooked, it's fine. You would not have to fully cook it. Now, if many women are careful to fully cook it before Shabbos, we mentioned the reason for that may be because if you move around a pot that's not fully cooked on the plata or on the blech, that could be a problem. If you move it to a place that's lower temperature, there's no problem. If you move it to a place that's higher temperature or back and forth, then it is a problem of cooking on Shabbos in a very severe way. And that's where the minhag may have come from, to just simply cook it all before. Now, if you do have food that is cooked all before Shabbos, then the question comes as to why you actually need a blech. And again, the answer would seem to be that the purpose of the blech is to threefold. First of all, is to conform with the opinion of the Chacham. After all, it's not 100% clear that the halacha is like Hananya, even though Rama says that that's the custom. He doesn't say that's the halacha. And there may be room to be strict like the Chacham. So therefore, according to Chacham, as long as it's mistamek yaf, as long as it continues to cook and get better, as Chalan does, presumably, you do need that flame covered. So that's point number one of the blech. Point number two of the blech is just to make sure, in case one time it will not be full, even half cooked, you just have it there just in case. And point number three is if you may want to do chazara, which we'll discuss further, you want to put it back, then you definitely need that to be covered. So that would be the point of having it there just in case you can do chazara. Okay, let me just discuss the ancient cooking equipment of old. They used to have a kira, a kupach, and a tanor. A kira was a rectangular kind of oven which you could cook inside of, put in the pot inside of it, or you could cook on top of it by setting the pot on the walls of the kira. Okay, another point is that the tanor, which in those days had an opening just on top, but it was narrow on the bottom, so it had a very, it was kind of very hot because the fact that it was wide on the bottom, narrow on the top, kept the heat in. There was no door on the side, so the heat could not escape. And the halacha for a tanor is that even if you cover the flame or remove them, even if the type of heat normally dies down very quickly because it's straw and stubble and so on, nevertheless, you are not allowed to do shehiya in there of an item that has to be covered, that where you need the flame covered, i.e., less than half cooked according to Chananya, or anything according to the Chacham, unless it's mistam garaloy, unless it's tasting bad as you cook it. So that is the halacha of a tanor. Our ovens do not have the din of a tanor. They have the din of a kupach, of a kira, because the oven doors are on the side, so therefore they do not maintain heat that well. Therefore, if you could cover the flame in them, it would have the din of a covered flame. Practically, it's hard to imagine a covered flame in our ovens, unless you consider if the coil is physically underneath a metal, maybe that could be considered covered. On the other hand, since it's built that way, therefore it would seem, according to the simple halacha, that is not a cover. You need to do an action that covers it. So if you just put a foil down on the bottom, it's not going to really cover it properly. The heat is coming from all sides. You would rather have to put in a metal box that minimizes the heat on all sides. Not very practical for our situations. Nevertheless, in theory, if you would do it, it would be considered a covered flame. Okay, a kupach of the olden days was the same as a kira, except that instead of having room for one pot, it had room for two pots. It had room for one pot, and therefore it kept the food hotter, and the heat did not escape that easily, and therefore it really depended on how you heated it up. If you heated it up with an item, with type of fuel that gets very hot, like proper coals and so on, then it had the din of a tanor, and you could not leave something in it unless it was, even if you removed those coals or covered them, unless it was already half cooked or more, according to the Chachamim. Whereas if you heated it with kash and glava, with stubble and straw, then the heat would die down quickly and it would be permissible like a regular oven akira. Okay, just going back to what we said before, that the purpose of the covering is to minimize the heat. Based on this, Shlem Zalman says a chiddush: if you cover the fire with a blech and then you adjust the fire that's under the blech and you make it higher, you just ruined the whole purpose of the blech, because you have shown that you do care about the heat, and therefore it becomes a problem. Okay, here's the concept of a raw piece of meat. A raw piece of meat, at least in those days, took a very long time to cook. And therefore, if you put it in right before Shabbos, then it would be allowed to do that sort of shehiya, even if the fire was not covered, because it's definitely not going to be ready for the Friday night meal. By the time the Shabbos day meal comes, it will be ready even if you don't stoke it, so we're not going to be concerned that you may stoke it. Even if most of the dish is already cooked or is not yet half cooked, whatever it is, a situation that might be forbidden, whether according to the Cham or Chananya, depending on the opinions, but you throw in a piece of raw meat right before Shabbos, it becomes permissible, because certainly you're not going to serve the dish besides that piece. You're going to wait. till the whole dish is cooked, which is not going to be until the next day. Nowadays, okay, so first of all, this heter only applies to raw meat, which takes a long time to cook, but not to fruits, vegetables, water, other stuff that does not take a long time to cook. Another point is that nowadays the argument can be made, our ovens and our stoves cook meat very quickly. You can cook meat pretty much within an hour, how much more so within 2 hours, and therefore it's difficult to use this as a heter because, from the time we start Shabbos till 2 hours, the meal is still going on then. It's possible for the meat to cook. Now, when you say, well, it's on a low flame, it's not going to cook, then yeah, but you could make the flame higher and get it ready for the Friday night meal, which is the whole problem, and therefore it's hard to use this heter of raw meat today. Okay, if a person does a forbidden Shehiya, it is forbidden until after Shabbos, Bichdei Sheyasa. Bichdei Sheyasa means the amount of time that it took to cook. Now, we know that if a person does a forbidden work on Shabbos, he only has to wait until after Shabbos. He does not have to wait Bichdei Sheyasa, unless it was a prohibition where he was telling a goy what to do. Then it becomes more of a problem. So that's because Amir Lanochri is kal be'ein habrius. People take it lightly. Similar, Shehiya, in a forbidden way, because it's not being done on Shabbos, it's being done before Shabbos, people take it a little bit lightly, and therefore the Chacham were even stricter, and they said, no, it has to be forbidden until after Shabbos, bichdei sheyasa. Okay, in the context of this siman, we also have the about a psik reisha, which is if you do a malacha, that's unintended, but is a necessary consequence of your action, that is considered forbidden, and it's even considered to be a Torah violation. In terms of our siman, that means if you take the pot out from the coals and you cause the coals to get ignited as they tumble over each other, that is a psik reisha that is forbidden. So the Machaber says we're talking about a situation where it's not actually sitting on the coals, it's sitting on an iron frame above the coals. The Machaber says that both because of the touching the coals issue, but also because of the issue that Machaber holds that partial Hatmona is a Hatmona, and if it would be sitting on the coals directly, that would be a forbidden Hatmona. In any case, if it's just sitting on the top, according to the Ramah, one could take it off as long as one does it very carefully, trying as best as they can not to move the coals. Then, even if the coals move, it's okay because it's considered a davar she'eino muskal, it's not his intent. However, if the coals are also around the side, now, as we said before, it can't be up all the way to the top because then it's Hatmona b'davar, but if it's also on the side and you remove it, that is definitely going to cause the coals to fall, and that is a problem. Nevertheless, we said you're allowed to do it through a goy because the goy's intent is just to take the pot out. He doesn't care about the necessary unintended consequence, and therefore that is permissible in Shabbos. This is a rule not just here, but in general, the laws of Shabbos. You can ask a goy to do something which is forbidden to a Jew as a psik reisha, because his intent is not to do that malach, just being done on the side. Okay. I believe that covers us for the laws of Shehiya. Let us move on to the laws of Chazara. Laws of Chazara are, the Chazara means to return. So you have a pot that you left on the flame on Shabbos with the permissible kind of Shehiya. And now you want to take the pot off and you want to take some of it out, obviously, serve to some of your guests. But you want to put it back on the fire because some of your guests are coming later. So here are the rules. The Gemara says several conditions. First of all, you have to intend to put it back. Second of all, you have to keep it in your hand. And third of all, the Gemara says you cannot transfer it from one pot to the other. Actually, the Gemara says these as a point of contention between opinions. An idea of not transferring from one pot to the other is a question that is not answered in the Gemara, as well as if you put it on a place where it doesn't belong for its final destination, like on a chair instead of on the ground. Also, there's a question that is not answered in the Gemara based on this. Okay, now in addition to these things that the Gemara says, there are other things that have to be kept also. And that is that they have to, obviously the food has to be fully cooked, otherwise putting it back is actually going to cook it on Shabbos. Another point is the Gemara says elsewhere that you can never do chazor into a tanner on Shabbos, into an oven, or even into a kira, only on top of a kira. Another point is that the food still has to be hot, and there's two explanations for that. Either because if it's cold, you're going to be cooking it, and that's only true if it is liquid, because a liquid, once it cools down, if you reheat it, that's a problem. Another point that the Magen Avraham brings is that if it's cold, then it's not considered to be a continuation of the Hatmona, but is rather considered like of the Shehiya, excuse me, but is rather considered like a new Shehiya. All right, did we say 7 conditions? I'm not sure. Let's just go over them. Keep it in your hand. Intend to put it back. Don't transfer to another pot. Still has to be hot. And do not, has to be fully cooked. Do not put it in the oven. Another one I forgot, which is, that's mentioned in connection with Shehiya, but the same is true of Chazara, even more so, that the flame has to be covered. And this is true even according to Hananya, that says that once the food is fully cooked, you can leave it on an open flame. That's all when it comes to Shehiya. When it comes to Chazara, you cannot put it back on an open flame, even according to Hananya, even if it's half cooked or fully cooked, the flame must always be covered. Because at the time you're putting it back on Shabbos is the time that you're more likely to stoke, even if the food is fully cooked, even if it's Stam Goraloi, that is still a problem. Okay, now as I said, some of these conditions are not universally accepted. The Machaber only brings the idea of not putting it down on the ground. And according to him, the idea of having in mind to put it back is not essential, and certainly not transferring from one pot to the other is not essential. Now the Ramah adds that you have to have it in mind. He does not add the fact that you cannot transfer from one pot to the other. The Magen Avraham does add that, and that's how the Alter Rebbe paskins. The Mishnah Berurah says you can be lenient and put it back even if it is transferred from one pot to the other. Okay, what else can I tell you about these 7 conditions? So a little bit about the condition of fully cooked. And that is the famous chicken bones issue. Shlomo Zalman holds that if the bones in the chalent, chicken bones in the chalent are not fully cooked, and you personally, or most of the people in your area eat those bones, so then he does consider those bones to be food, and therefore on Friday night, if you would take off that chalent, you want to put it back, it would be a problem if those bones are not fully cooked and soft and ready for eating. Rav Moshe holds no, chicken bones are not considered food, even if you personally eat them. Even if most of the people in the place eat them, they are not considered food, and therefore putting it back is not a problem, regardless of your bones. So that is something worth noting. Another thing worth noting is that our ovens, many say, are not considered ovens. Because in those days, the kira had a inside and a top. You could either put it in the inside or on the top. Putting it in the inside, when you could have put it on the top, is a greater act of cooking, and is therefore forbidden even if you keep the other conditions. However, nowadays our stovetops and our ovens are 2 different implements, 2 different ways of cooking. They're not connected. It's not the same heat source for both. And therefore one could say one is not, there's different foods you cook in different places, and putting it in the oven is no more an act of cooking than putting it on the stovetop. Nevertheless, as we mentioned before, it would seem that putting it in the oven is a problem anyway because you don't have the heat source covered in the oven. Nevertheless, I believe Rav Yosef says you may put it back in the oven, and he evidently holds that the heat source that is covered within the oven itself is enough. But again, that's only true if that is the case. If you have an element that is uncovered in the oven, you'll have a problem. It has to be that the element is covered in the oven, or the fire is covered in the oven, or whatever it is. In any case, it is worth noting that an oven door cannot be closed onto food that's in it if the food is not fully cooked, and an oven door cannot be opened if that's going to allow cold air in a way that may cause the oven to turn on. Now, it's not so different than a refrigerator, except the refrigerator is only under Rabbanan, according to many poskim, and an oven with fire is the eraisa. So therefore, we do try to be strict and only open the oven when the element is on anyway, or the fire is on anyway, whatever it is. Or if you have a Shabbos mode oven, then presumably that means that the oven, open the oven door, does not cause it to turn on faster. Okay, based on the above, we understand that if you want to take cholent and serve it to your guests on Shabbos, you must keep it in your hand. Now, we did say an opinion that says that if you put it down on the counter, as long as your hand is on it, it is still okay. I believe Moshe Feinstein holds that. But many poskim say, no, you actually have to hold it in your hand. It's not enough to just have your hand on it. It has to be supported by your hand. So if it's too heavy, have somebody else help you, or else you could put the handle of it on the side of the counter, and that way you're holding it in a way that without your hand it would not stand. But that's another way out of it. Now, if you do want to add hot water to the cholent, so first of all, it should be pointed out that the Yossi brings down Rabbeinu Yonah says that you cannot do that regardless, because once you take the hot water out of the kli that it's in, it goes from being a kli rishon to an irrita kli rishon, which does not have the same power to cook as a kli rishon, and therefore when you pour it back into the kli rishon, it's like you're heating it up to a different level of cooking, and therefore it itself is cooked. Excuse me. However, Ashkenazi poskim do not bring down that opinion, and according to them, you are allowed to do this. So basically, you would be allowed to take the, let's say, a kettle with water, and pick it up off the fire with the intent to put it back, pour straight out of the kettle into the cholent, and put it back. Some say you should pick up the cholent as you're doing it, so that the pouring of the water shouldn't, turn it around and be like mixing it. You know, to mix it on the fire on Shabbos. Some say that's not a problem as long as you do it slowly. But in any case, that is okay. It is, though, noteworthy that you should not do it in a way that the steam goes back up into the kettle, because then you might be making it fleshing. So you should make sure the steam dissipates before you do this, or do it at a distance. Same thing you can do with an urn. Again, if you can't move the urn, so you just move the chicken soup over to the urn and follow the same formula. Just make sure not to make it fleshing, as we said. All right, what else do we have to discuss? Oh yeah. Sorry, as far as the different conditions of Chazara, we did have the opinion of the Ran, who was very lenient, and the opinion of Tosfos, who was very strict. The Ran says that 3 of these conditions, i.e. keep it in mind, keep it in your hand, and don't transfer from one to the other, from one part to the other, are all only if you took it off on Erev Shabbos, you're going to put it back on Shabbos. Whereas if you took it off on Shabbos, and you're putting it back on Shabbos, then those conditions do not apply. Even if you had no intent to put it back, even if you put it down on the ground, even if you transfer from one part to the other, you're allowed to put it back. Because once Shabbos came in, if it was on the pod, it's considered to be its place for Shabbos. Okay, and some extend that even further, and say you could even put it back into an oven on Shabbos if it was taken out on Shabbos. Now, in practice, Alter is not to rely on this. On the other hand, the minhag is to rely on it, and therefore it's not really a problem, at least b'di'evad, to rely on it, because that is the minhag. So based on this, if one took food out of the oven on Shabbos, or I should say off the fire on Shabbos, off the plateau, off the blech, and then one wants to put it back, if they don't have food for the next day, otherwise, hot food for the next day, otherwise, there's room to be lenient because of the Ran. Now, I should say, by the way, if you took off the pot by mistake, took off the wrong pot by mistake, so then Farkash brings down shitas that say that should be considered allowed to put back, because even though you didn't intend to put it back, that's only because you thought it was the wrong pot. But if you had known, you wouldn't have had that intent. Now, once you put it down on the table, it's already a problem. However, like we said, if necessary, you can rely on the Ran. Now, Tosfos takes the opposite extreme. Tosfos says that not only do you have to keep these conditions on Shabbos itself, you would have to keep them on Erev Shabbos. On Erev Shabbos, within the amount of time that it would have taken to heat up this food, so whatever it is, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, during that time, you cannot do Chazorah with this food without the conditions of Chazorah. So that is a significant chumrah. Some say, by the way, this is only if you took it off and you are putting it back. But if you put it on right now for the first time, it's okay. And some say if it's raw and you're cooking it, it's also okay, because it's only when you're doing it in a way of chazara that it's a problem. All right, the minhag is, by the way, that you don't have to follow Tosfos, but a person who is strict, I think all this is a Baal Nefesh, will be strict and be careful even during that time. Now, it's hard to see a situation where you actually have this problem at hand, because if you go to shul on time, so you're going before, the candlelighting time, and that's enough time for this food to heat up anyway. So you simply won't be home during that time of putting it back and forth. Okay, as far as doing a forbidden chazar, benefiting, I should say, from a forbidden chazar. If you did chazar in a forbidden way, in a way that's forbidden according to all opinions meaning to say, if it would be permissible according to some opinions, then we could rely on them, but for example, the Ran, like we said before. So in any case, whether it was b'shogig or b'mezid, it's also until after Shabbos b'chdei sheyasa. Now, if it's mistamek v'raloi, so you didn't benefit at all because it's tasting worse as a result of your chazara, then it's permissible even on Shabbos because you did not benefit. Now, some say even mistamek yafalei is okay because it's not such a significant change. Now, if it was b'shogig, then the Magen Avraham says you can rely on this opinion for other people. Other people say, meaning to not the person who did it, not his household members, but other people could benefit. If the guy did it, so it goes one step down, and even b'mezid is mutar even stam g'yafalei, as long as it was mevushal kol tzar. Now, if the guy heated it up from being cold, and the Jew knew about it, so because he actually accomplished something, then it's asur. But if the Jew did not know about it, then it's mutar, because in other words, it was already permissible, it was already edible before, because it was not, it was fully cooked, it just was cold. So he heated up, but probably the Jew didn't want him to do that. He wouldn't have let him do it had he known. So he wouldn't want it to become asur. Now, if the Jew put it back in a way, if the non-Jew put it back in a way that would be permissible for a Jew to do according to some opinions, then it would not be a problem. Meaning to say, if he put back something that was cold and had cooled, it was liquid and had cooled down to less than he has to let his body, or even cooled down completely. So according to some Rishonim, there is ein b'shlach b'shul even balach, and he heated it in a way that would be permissible for a Jew according to those opinions. For example, he didn't do it directly over a fire; he did it a little bit distant from a fireplace or some other way on a radiator or whatever it is. So therefore, because some allow a Jew to do it, even l'chatchila, so we can rely on what the Gentile did b'di'evad. Okay, the Machaber brought that if you wake up in the morning and you saw that your pot is burning, you can lift it up, you can put an empty pot in its place, and then put it down on top of the empty pot. And the Machaber says that you have to be careful not to put it down on the ground. So the idea is that in this case, the Machaber clearly holds you have to keep the conditions of chazor when you put it back on top of a pot, because that is still considered a normal place to cook. Whereas the Rama says that if you put it on top of a pot that's on the fire, top of a full pot that's on the fire, then it is permissible, and you don't have to keep the conditions of chazar. Obviously, you have to keep the conditions of bishul, but you don't have to keep the conditions of chazar. You need to say if it is liquid and it's still hot, it's okay as long as you didn't, even if you put it down on the ground, even if you had no intent to put it back, and so on and so forth. However, if it is liquid and cold, obviously you're going to have a problem of actual bishul. If it is fully cooked and dry, then you can put it back, even if it's cold. The conditions that do not apply. Why not? Because this does not appear to look like cooking, since it's not a normal place to cook on top of a pot. There's a bit of a machlokes when it comes to putting something on a blech or on a plata, because some say that a blech is like putting it on top of an empty pot, or in an empty pot, I should say, because the blech does not provide a hefsek, since it becomes like nullified to the thing that's covering. That seems to be the Menalacha for Ashkenazim based on Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. However, Bavad Yosef holds, and many Sfaradim follow this, that the blech is not considered a normal place to cook, because you don't cook on a blech generally during the week. Inside a pot is something else, because the pot becomes secondary to the pot that's in it. But when you have a blech and a pot, the blech creates a separate space. It's not considered a normal way to cook, and therefore you would not have to keep the conditions of chazara onto a blech. You would still have to keep it. Obviously, you have to keep the conditions of bishul, but not the conditions of chazara. The same argument can be made about a plata, that a plata is not considered a normal way to cook. It's only used for reheating. On the other hand, many poskim say, Rav Wosner and others say, that since for Shabbos, as far as Shabbos is concerned, the definition of cooking is reheating. In other words, to bring something from cold to yatz and let it boil is a halachic definition of cooking, even though it does not reach that definition in terms of society at large, who considers making something raw cooked to be cooking. So, since as far as the laws of bishul and Shabbos are concerned, this is a normal way to cook. Therefore, they say it is forbidden to do chazara onto a plata without the conditions. Now, the very easy way to get out of this whole problem is to simply put it on top of a pot. That pot, by the way, could be empty as long as you're not putting it in the pot. You're going to put it on top of the pot, so you could use an upside down foil tray or anything else like that where it does not actually go into it. All right, I believe that covers us for Siman Reish Nun Gimel. Actually, we also did discuss the question of the pots in those, the heating ovens in those days. Ovens used to heat the house. The goyim were allowed to ask the goy to start those fires on Shabbos morning, because it was considered dangerous to leave people in the cold countries, cold parts of the year, and so on. So because that was permissible, the question arose, what if, are you allowed to put something there if you know he's going to heat it up later? And the answer was no. The question is, can he put something there? And there is a minhag to be lenient, but it's better if you put something down in between. Actually, if you put something down in between, I believe it's mutter even if a Jew does it. Just give me a second, please. Yeah, excuse me. If it's something that does not have any issue with bishul, if it's dry and fully cooked, some say you can put it there knowing that the guy is going to heat it up later. Some say you have to put something down on top of the oven, even though it's not a normal place to cook, but because it is a normal place to reheat, you have to do an action that reminds you not to stoke. You have to put something on top. Now, if it's something that could cook because it's cold or it's raw, then you cannot put it there before the guy anyway, even with this, reminder because it becomes a visual issue. Nevertheless, you can tell a goy to do it before he heats up the oven itself, because that's not his main intent. Some are strict with that. I think the Taz is strict with that. If his intent, if there's an area where they would put water so that the thing should not split, that was also okay, because his intent is to just cause the thing not to split. Some say that still the Jew should not use it for washing dishes, because the Jew, as far as the Jew is concerned, that is a forbidden kind of Shehiya, because he, as far as he is concerned, it's like an uncovered flame, basically, with the, when the guy heats it, there's nothing reminding him not to cook, and therefore it could be a problem. And therefore, if he did it, that water should not be used on Shabbos. Okay, moving on to Reish Nun Daled. The beginning of Reish Nun Daled was all about barbecues, and basically, the issue with barbecues is that the heter of basar chai does not apply. Basar chai, we said in the previous sif, is about raw meat. There is no heter to put raw meat directly on the fire, because that cooks very quickly, and therefore we don't have that heter. Now we do have the heter of raw meat if it is a type of meat that is going to be damaged from a sudden change of temperature. So if you have it inside an oven, and if you would open that oven, it would ruin the temperature and ruin the meat, then it would be permissible, because you're not going to open it to stoke the coals if that would ruin the meat. We don't really have that kind of meat that I know of today, so that doesn't really apply. In any case, once the meat is cooked on both sides, by the way, there is no problem at all. Now, if you are putting it directly on the coals and it's already cooked in Ma'achal Ben Rusoi, then it's mutter even according to the Chum of Chananya, because once it is cooked to that extent, you would be ruining it if you would continue to stoke it. Now, if it's less than Yatzlet, you cannot put it directly in the coals either, because you obviously don't care if it's getting burnt, because you put it on the coals themselves. And therefore, additional, and it's not yet ready, so therefore you will consider going to stoke it. Once it's half cooked, so it is more or less ready, then we're not concerned you're going to do it anymore, because it's just going to make it worse. If it's not yet fully cooked, not even half cooked, then it is okay. And here's the heter. The Machaber does not hold up what the Rambam does, and that is if you seal the oven shut with clay or with mud or cement, however they used to do it, then it's okay regardless of whatever's inside, meat, pot, half cooked, less than half cooked, raw, whatever it is. Because by the time you come to stoke it, you're going to have to get a chisel or a hammer or a screwdriver, whatever it is, to remove that clay or whatever it is, and then open it up. And by that time, you'll remember it's Shabbos. And this concept is brought concerning a person who takes off the knobs of the oven and puts it in another place. Maybe that is the same as this and would make it into a permissible Shehiya. I should also mention the fact that a blech does not have to cover the knobs, because once you're minimizing the heat of the fire, that's enough. Covering the knob is an extra thing, which would also remind you not to stoke it. Now, if the knobs and the blech are one, if the knobs are below the blech, below the stovetop, and the blech covers it. So in order to change the flame, you would have to take everything off and then take the blech off. That is definitely a very big job, which you would for sure remember before that, and that's permissible according to all opinions. That does create a kind of blech situation. That means even according to Chazon Ish, I should qualify and explain what I'm saying. Even according to Chazon Ish, who says that normally a blech does not help because the blech itself heats up and becomes like a fire. Nevertheless, in this case, you would agree that it's okay, because that little lip makes it impossible to turn the heat without taking everything off and then turning and then putting it back on. Whatever, that whole thing would take so long that you would remember by then. Okay. Another point in Reish Nun Daled is about raw fruit. Raw fruit has the halacha of, I should say, fruit that is edible raw, as well as vegetable edible raw, whatever it is, has the halacha of Michael ben Brusoi. Meaning to say, we're not concerned that you're going to stoke coals on that situation because it's already edible as is. That only applies to raw fruits and vegetables which are good to eat raw, whereas something that is barely edible raw but is not as good as when it's cooked, for example, water, which is much better when it's warm, becomes a whole different item, it becomes a tea or soup or something for coffee, so it's like a whole different level, and therefore is considered a significant change from cold to hot, and therefore we are concerned that you may stoke it for that change, and therefore it's a problem. So it would apply to onion or other things that are barely edible raw, even though you could, in theory, eat them raw. Okay, when it comes to bread, so just like food has to be cooked machal ben rusoi, so too the bread in your oven has to be cooked machal ben rusoi. The definition of machal ben rusoi, we said, is that it has a crust, and there's an argument in the Rishonim based on the language of the Gemara, if the crust has to be formed on both sides or just on one side, because it's all based on the question in the oven of those days, will the side facing the fire heat first or the side facing the oven where it got stuck on, will that heat first? In any case, it's better to be strict and make sure there's crust on both sides for it to be permissible, but by the end you could rely on a crust on one side. Now, in those days, there was a problem with scraping off the bread from the side of the oven, because that was considered to be a kind of non-Shabbos activity. So generally, once if you baked the bread in a permissible way, and you could say that already gotten this crust before Shabbos, so then it was allowed to remove it because you didn't do anything wrong, and you could remove it either with a regular scraper, a peel it's called, or with the shinoi if possible. But actually, no, excuse me, I don't think you need a shinoi if you cooked it in the regular way. If you cooked it in a permissible way, you didn't need a shinoi. But that's only if you're going to use it for Shabbos. It's not like you're desperate for it for Shabbos. You have other things, but you want it for Shabbos, that's okay. If you don't want it for Shabbos, we said you can't remove it at all, because you can't move anything. You can't even move anything for after Shabbos. Now, if you did it in a forbidden way, maybe say that had not formed the crust before Shabbos, then you're not allowed to remove it on Shabbos. It's forbidden to eat, basically. So that means even if there is no need to peel anything off, like for example in our ovens, where there's no need to peel anything off, but it's simply forbidden bread. So what's the point of removing it? You're not allowed to eat it. Now, if you have nothing else to eat for the 3 meals of Shabbos, you could remove as much as you need for the 3 meals of Shabbos. If you've already had 1 meal, you need for 2 meals, or you've had 2 meals and you need for 1 meal, or whatever it is, same thing. Whatever you need for the 2 meals of Shabbos, you can remove. You can tell other people that are in the same situation, they can remove it as well. Better to do it with a shinoi, but if necessary, you can even do it with that peel. Okay, nowadays, basically we don't have to peel anything off, so as long as you bake it before Shabbos in a way that's permissible, it's okay to remove. If you did it in a way that's forbidden, once again, if you need it for Shabbos, you can remove it, but if not, not. Now, the Mother Rome says needing it for Shabbos means you need it for eating. Whereas if you have what to eat, although it's not left a mission, you have sliced bread or whatever, that's not considered enough of a need to allow you to eat these breads. Okay, let's say you plan on eating the bread after Shabbos. So here there's a difference between nowadays and the olden days. Nowadays, so if we would permit you to eat it after Shabbos, then, and we would allow you to do it, then we're afraid that you might do it, you might change your mind and want to eat it on Shabbos, and then you will stoke the coals to get it ready. Whereas in the olden days where it had to be peeled off and you were not allowed to peel it off, so therefore they allow you to do it in the first place because you're not going to be allowed to peel it off, and therefore there's going to be no way that you're going to ever change your mind to use it on Shabbos, and therefore it's allowed. Again, this is not a situation where you need it for Shabbos, but you may change your mind. So you're not going to change your mind because you know that it is forbidden. Okay, as far as the interesting halacha of doing a small avera to save somebody from the big avera. Let's say somebody put a challah in an oven, whether on purpose or by accident. So he is allowed to remove it before it bakes because he is saving himself from a larger avera. Even though he is using the peel, better if he doesn't use that peel, but even if he does, the fact is he's saving himself from a larger avera. However, nobody else is allowed to do that because it's a minor sin to remove that. We don't allow a person to do a minor sin in order to save somebody else from a major sin. Now, the exceptions to that, we said, are, for example, a person who may have been the cause of the major sin in some way. An example we gave is if it's his field and they may be eating untithed fruits because of him, so therefore he might do a minor sin to save somebody from a major sin. Another point is that it's only because this person was a Shehiya in that he did this baking either by accident or on purpose on Shabbos. Whereas the person was not the cause of his own sin. For example, the woman who was kidnapped, the girl who was kidnapped, the Rashba says the father has to run after her and save her. So you bring a small sin, meant to say designating one Shabbos to save her from many sins, from large sin, meant to say to designating the whole Shabbos and on her whole Yiddishkeit and so on. But she didn't do anything wrong, and therefore it is permissible and even obligatory. So we discussed the parallels in terms of inviting people for Shabbos. It's not a simple matter. Okay, that pretty much covers us for Reish Nun Daled 254. Let us move on to 257, Reish Nun Zayin. We already tied up the loose ends of Reish Nun Zayin, but let's go back to the beginning and do some chazara on the beginning of it. And basically, there is two issues of Hatmona. There's Hatmona in a way that does not add heat, and Hatmona in a way that does add heat. Hatmona in a way that does not add heat is forbidden to do on Shabbos itself. The reason is because you may, when you come to do that insulation, you need to say in pillows, blankets, or anything else that does not add heat. When you come to do that, if you find the pot is not fully hot, which is really what it has to be, when you want to insulate something, you want it to be very hot at that moment. It's not so hot you may forget and go to heat it up. Now, of course, heating something up on Shabbos is forbidden if it's liquid and it cooled down. Even according to Rishonim, let's say that even liquid is not a problem to reheat. Rambam holds that. Nevertheless, on a fire, we're afraid you may stoke that fire. So in any case, the sages forbade insulating on Shabbos in a way that does not add heat as well. When it comes to something that adds heat, so we said that's not even permissible from before Shabbos. And the reason for that is that you may insulate in coals and then you may stoke those coals. Now, what's the difference between Shehiya and Hatmona? Because when we come to Shehiya, we say if it's half cooked, it's okay. If there's something raw, it's okay. And when it comes to Hatmona, we do not have those leniencies according to the main halacha. The reason is that Shehiya is generally for the nighttime meal, because Shehiya is not going to really keep it hot for the daytime meal in those days when the heat source is cooled off. And therefore, there's nothing you can do that's going to keep it hot for the daytime meal. And therefore, it was okay as long as it was Mistam Baraloi, or Korn Chanani, as long as it's half cooked, that was okay. Or if it's raw, it's also okay, because it's not going to be ready for the Shabbos day, for the Friday night meal. It'll be ready for the Shabbos day meal, even though it'll be cold. No problem. When it comes to the Hatmona, because it was insulated with heat and it could keep it hot for the next day, so therefore we are concerned that you're going to stoke it to keep it hot for the next day. And therefore, even if you intend to steam it at night, it doesn't make a difference. You may change your mind for the next day, and then you may stoke it to keep it hot. And therefore, the fact that it's half cooked, fully cooked, even some rally does not help you because you're so interested in keeping it hot for the next day, you may stoke it. And the same applies to basar chai. It does not help if it's raw, because by the time Shabbos day comes around, it will be cooked, and you will want to make sure that it stays hot, and therefore you may do some stoking. Now, this is all according to the halacha l'maisa. We did say there are Rishonim who say Shehiya and Hatmona the same thing. Rashi holds that, and based on that, we have various leniencies according to those opinions. First of all, we have the Kolbay, I believe it is, who says that you could actually start with the Rashbam. The Rashbam says as long as it's half cooked, it's okay, or fully cooked according to Hananya. And the reason is because it would be a permissible Shehiya, and therefore he would say it's a permissible Hatmona as well. And the Kolbay takes it one step further, and he says that you could even do any Hatmona for the next day, because Shehiya, you're allowed to do basar chai. Why? Because it's not going to be until the next day. So therefore, he says Shehiya for the next day is also good, even though you might change your mind. He doesn't care about that. He assumes you're not going to change your mind once you decide for the next day. It's okay. And the same thing can be applied for Hatmona. Anything for the next day is okay. The Machaber does not bring down these opinions, by the way, and therefore the person cannot rely on them even being able to according to the Machaber. However, the Ramah does, and therefore b'diavad you can rely on them. Actually, the one about having it for the next day, the Machaber says, the Ramah says you can rely on b'diavad as long as shelo yehei ragel b'kach, as long as the person is not doing this on a constant basis. A person who did a forbidden Shehiya, if it only maintained the heat, it is not forbidden b'diavad. If it elevated the heat, like for example a Shehiya thing that added heat, then it is forbidden until after Shabbos. And even though it's not explicit in the Shulchan Aruch, it seems that it is forbidden until b'chdei sheyasa. Again, that's only if it's done in a way that is forbidden according to all opinions, which we said according to the Rashbam and the Kolbay, there is great room for leniency, and b'diavad we could rely on them. Now, there is a leniency that in Bein Hashmashas you're allowed to do Hatmona in a way that does not add heat. And the reason for that leniency is that at that time, the pots in a Jewish kitchen are certainly hot and there's no suspicion that you may heat it up. The Alter Rebbe was strict if the individual accepted Shabbos personally, explicitly, like a woman who lit Shabbos candles, or a man who said it was Mashir or Baruch or anything else that is considered a Shabbos acceptance. The Mishnah was not sure of that, but that was Alter Rebbe's psak, and that is important to note. Examples of something that adds heat, we said, are the decomposing olives, sesame, salt, and sand that was heated by the sun, and all kinds of other things. Practically today, we don't really have these items. The only thing that might be considered insulating whether it adds heat, we said, if you wrap it in pillows and or blankets on top of a plata or whatever. Now, as far as chazorah to a situation of Hatmona, we know that for Shehiya, there's all kinds of rules of chazorah. For Hatmona, we said there's not really many rules. As long as it was in a situation of Hatmona before Shabbos, it became uncovered, you're allowed to put it back. And if you uncover it on purpose, you're allowed to put it back. You can take off a lesser one, put on a higher one, and so on and so forth. The only thing you cannot do is if it's adding heat in some way, obviously in a permissible way, like we'll discuss, you cannot add a Hatmona if the item is not fully cooked. If it's just maintaining heat, we said earlier it's a machlokes, different opinions about that. Okay, the rest of the siman I think we already covered in the earlier Chazara. So, actually just one more point, is that if you drape the towels in such a way that they're not hugging the side of the pot, so that even if it is on the plata, but the towels are not actually hugging it, but you put like a little piece of wood or something else on the top of it and you drape the towels over the sides, so it's not actually hugging it, therefore it is not considered a forbidden Hatmona. Hatmona is only if it's done in a way that is similar to coals, in which case it is hugging the sides. All right, please, my friends, do not rely on this review that I gave you. I may have missed out on one thing or another, or on many things. I just did a review of what came to my head. And therefore, please do review your own notes and the Shulchan Aruch and the Shiurim that are all uploaded online. And I hope you will do well on the test that I will send you shortly. And we'll be back with Hashem's help next week, and we'll learn Monday night with Hashem's help, Siman 318, the laws of Bishul on Shabbos. All the best, bye.